Are you having a hard time finding great investment properties? Unfortunately, the best deals are rarely found locally. Successful investing begins with the right properties in the right markets. Norada Real Estate provides everything you need to invest in the best deals across the United States. Our simple, proven system will help you create real wealth and passive monthly cash flow. Learn how to find the best deals by downloading your free copy of The Ultimate Guide to Passive Real Estate Investing at noradarealestate.com. That's Norada realestate.com.
You are listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast with Buck Joffrey. Get ready to change your life.
Welcome, everybody. This is Buck Joffrey with the Wealth Formula Podcast, and I'd like to start out this episode, as I always do, reminding you that you have wealthformula.com there, and you have an abundance of resources there that you need to tap into. I mean, this podcast is only part of that. Along with a number of special downloads, there is a copy of my book, 7 Secrets of Eternal Wealth, which is a great place to start if you are interested in this world of real asset investing. And that book, by the way, it was a #1 seller on Amazon, but it's yours for free as a PDF. If you simply go to the website and download it, you can also get it by texting me at 44222 and simply type Wealth Formula, and that is one word, Wealth Formula, 44222, and the book is yours. I also like to take a moment for a shout out to George Newberry's group, American Homeowner Preservation, one of our sponsors. Amazing business that buys mortgages for pennies on the dollar from banks and then allows us, the investors, to go in and invest and make a preferred return of 12%, at least for now. George is going to lower that pretty soon, so you better get in there soon. Of course, the profit is nice, but you also get to help people stay in their homes. Great opportunity, great business. That is American Homeowner Preservation, and that's ahpfunding.com. Now, on to today's show. A lot of people ask me, why the heck did you start podcasting anyway? Why'd you do that? Well, it's a good question, and it went something like this. You see, I used to listen to podcasts all of the time, and most of them, like probably you, if you're listening to this podcast, were in the real estate arena. But after a while, you know what? I realized that, a few things. First of all, even if I liked a podcast, a good chunk of those shows really didn't relate to me at all. I mean, for example, there would be shows about making a few $1,000s flipping houses or wholesaling. And those things just really weren't part of my world. I wasn't interested in it. After all, I was the highly successful and highly educated physician and a successful entrepreneur. I was already making money. I didn't need someone to tell me how I could spend several hours a week or day to make a few $1,000s. That simply was not a good use of time for me. I didn't need to escape from a cubicle, right? I wasn't one of those people who's trying to figure out how to make a few bucks so I can escape from a cubicle. I just wanted to make more money, and I wanted to invest outside of Wall Street. There was, in fact, no one show that spoke to me. On the other hand, I got so interested in investing topics and the economy that I couldn't keep my own mouth shut. My wife would take me to a party, and I'd pretty much be bored out of my mind unless someone started talking to me either about NFL football, go Vikes, by the way, go Vikes, or the economy, or, investing, or, anything related to the topics that I talk about in this show. And once in a while, I'd find a kindred spirit and nerd out talking about investing or how to save on taxes or something like that. And over time, what I realized is that, I had learned so much because I was so interested in this stuff, that I really, I read so many books and I listened to so many other podcasts that were great. I learned a ton. And when I shared things with people, they actually enjoyed listening to me and wanted to know more. So then it occurred to me, well, you know what? Maybe I should start my own podcast. So I did. The problem was that for the first several shows, no one listened to me. It was like, I knew I was talking to myself, and then life got busy. So then I just kind of stopped, and I got busy with my own businesses, and I was thinking, well, there's just not a lot of time to do this. So for a year or two, I just stopped. Then about 18 months ago, again, I was starting to listen to podcasts again. Things calmed down with businesses, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to go all in on this. And if for nothing else, I'm going to just record my own thoughts, and, hopefully somebody will listen to me. And if not, at least I got a place to talk about things that I like and not bore the heck out of everyone else. Then a funny thing happened. People did start listening to me, and I started getting some guests, and some of them were even people who were not friends and family. Before you know it, I got invited on other people's podcasts, which was even better, because then some of you heard me on those podcasts, and then you joined me on this journey. And today I've got a podcast that, it goes up and down, right, in terms of the downloads. But, we've had up north of 30,000 downloads in a single month. And as you know, I interviewed Robert Kiyosaki the last few weeks ago. I mean, this has been a crazy ride, right? It's starting with the simple, I like talking about something, so I'm going to do a show. Now, here's the thing. When I started, I didn't really even think about making money from the podcast. And that's true, because I really didn't know how. I mean, I knew you could have sponsorships and stuff, but no one's going to sponsor a show that has no listeners. So it was really just sort of a hobby and a passion project. But then the monetization actually came pretty easily. You see, businesses were understanding what I was talking about and looking at me and my ethos, and then the people who were following me and saying, I want to get in front of those people, right? So then they would sponsor the show. And that was easy too. I mean, I got guys like George, who I'd been investing with before, and basically, that's an easy quote unquote sell, because listen, I've already put a ton of money in this guy's fund. Why don't I tell other people about it, and then he pays me for it? Not a bad deal, right? And then, of course, there's other things that you might be familiar with. I'm an active investor. I love investing, and it's one of my passions. And so it made sense, since people had asked me for a while if they could, and they want to know what I was investing in, if they could invest by my side, to start something like Investor Club for accredited investors. By the way, you can sign up for that, and if you are an accredited investor, you should do it. And that helped me to continue to do more of what I love, and in the meantime, start my own small funds and asset management business. And so this has really, frankly, been incredibly organic, right? And from the standpoint of the podcast itself, it really still doesn't feel like work. It's still really kind of, it's really fun. Now, of course, other stuff gets busy when you start building a business around something, and not everything's fun. But the podcast part is a lot of fun. Talking to people is a lot of fun. So that sounds kind of nice, right? I mean, what I've done essentially is I've been talking about my passions, and along the way, realizing that I can make some money doing it. And you know what? It wasn't really a full-time gig. I mean, now it's, for the most part, the thing that I probably spend the most time with, but it was just something I just did on the side. I mean, I literally did the first several, I shouldn't even say this. I did the first several podcasts in my boxers from the guest room, right? So I was literally talking to people like, the chief economist at Fannie Mae, right? And I was in boxers in my guest room. So anyway, the point is that it sounds sort of nice, right? If you can do what you want and make some money, then why not do it? Because that's basically what I'm doing. And I'm 100% convinced that really, this is something that if you have a passion for anything, if you're a guy who likes talking about stuff, and not everybody wants to listen to you, but you want to keep talking about it, and you get really excited when someone else wants to talk to you about it, then maybe you should consider a podcast too. I mean, you might be a doctor like me, but unlike me, actually enjoy talking about medicine. I shouldn't say that. I don't not like talking about medicine. It's just not my favorite topic. I mean, I think some wellness stuff and stuff is pretty cool, but there are tons of docs out there and orthodontists and veterinarians, and I could think all the investors in my investor club who've just got incredibly interesting stuff to talk about. And I mean, that's one of the cool things about it. And there are people out there in this world, because we're talking about a global audience. We have audiences, our audiences across the world. There are tons of people that no matter what your passions are, there's a group of people who share those passions and who would love to hear you talk. So the nice thing about that is that if you start doing that, you don't have to ramble on at parties to people who don't even really want to listen to you. You can literally talk about anything that interests you, because there are others in the world, even if they don't live near you, which most of my audience does not, shares your passions. Podcasts are great because what they do is they allow you to find those people. They allow you to essentially find your tribe. And here's the thing. It's technically very easy to do. Now, Phil, who's my media guy here, will tell you that I'm not particularly, technically savvy. I mean, I'm fine on the internet, but all this stuff, this podcast equipment and audio equipment, all this stuff, it's not my thing. I'm not, I've never really spent any time to try to learn it. And it's pretty easy. And I have this fancy setup, but you don't really need this fancy setup. I did it because I took this course and this guy said to buy it, but you really need to buy all this stuff. Anyway, I'm hoping, therefore, based on what I'm telling you, that I might be planting a seed for some of you, and it might inspire you to try this podcasting thing. So, for that purpose, I got my friend Paul Colligan on the show to talk about podcasting today. Now, Paul has taught thousands of people to podcast and is a master at not only the technical part, but also the marketing and monetization, because a lot of you were probably thinking, yeah, Buck, I'd like to do that, but really, frankly, I'm not going to do that as a hobby if I can't make any money. And I get that. Most of the time, I'm the same way. But, if you think you've got something worth sharing with the rest of the world, you're going to really enjoy this podcast today. So when we come back, Paul Colligan. Hey, it's Buck Joffrey. You know how I feel about the stock market. So what would it take for me to invest in the S&P 500? Well, you'd have to minimize fees. You'd have to give me most of the upside of the market and none of the downside. That's right. I don't like losing money. You'd have to let me leverage my gains so that I could amplify my returns. And you'd have to let my money grow tax-free. Think I'm crazy, right? Guess what? I found a strategy that does exactly this and more. It's called Velocity Plus, and it's available to you if you make at least $100,000 per year. To learn more about this life-changing and mind-boggling strategy, go to wealthformulabanking.com. Again, that's wealthformulabanking.com. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, my guest on Wealth Formula Podcast is Paul Colligan. Paul is a podcasting guru and one of the authorities in this growing medium. He has a unique background for this space that's also very helpful. I mean, he's also, in addition to being a podcast guru, he's an internet marketer. He is a guy who understands marketing. He's worked with Traffic Geyser, Rubicon International, Piranha Marketing, Joe Polish's group, Microsoft, and Pearson Education. He's also a popular keynote speaker on internet technology, having presented at events around the world, including Blog World and New Media Expo, the European Business Podcasting Summit, Google Tech Talks, Mac World, Social Media Marketing World, and Microsoft Tech Ed. Paul, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I've been thinking about this for a while because, you're one of the podcast gurus out there that many major brands turn to for advice. Well, why don't we start out by just telling us, how did you get into this area? Because it sounds like, at least from what I know, you started out more as a marketer, right? A marketer proper, and kind of went into this, or were you always in the podcast area?
This is a fun one. In 2000, 4 years before podcasting hit, 5 years before it kind of hit big, I was working for a management consulting firm in downtown Portland. And it was sucking the life out of me. The only respite, the only release I got was I was a big Audible addict at the time.
Yeah.
And this is back in the early days when the Pocket PCs, had 16 meg, not gig, meg. And, I could put enough on my Pocket PC to give me the morning commute, the commute back home, and maybe a little bit of lunchtime break. But I was addicted. I loved it.
Yeah.
Out of the blue, I got an email from the CEO of Audible who says, when I come into town, I'd like to take the 5 oldest customers and buy them dinner.
Oh, wow. So you were
Exactly.
like one of the 5 oldest customers in
Yeah,
Audible?
well, for in that town.
Oh, okay. Got it.
But yeah. And remember, this is 2000. This is we were not carrying portable devices back then.
I wasn't. Yeah, I was going to say.
And so we went to dinner, and the guy was amazing. And he had been given, and that's a whole nother story, but basically he had been kind of given a front row seat to where digital media was going to go. And he had based Audible on that. And he really painted this fascinating picture of what was going to happen in the future. So that was number one. At the time, I was planning my exit strategy from the consulting company, and I was starting to build my first information product, and it was actually an audio product. So it hit me, and I didn't even think about this coming to the dinner, but it hit me as I'm starting to leave the dinner. Wait a minute, the largest audio distribution digital in the world is sitting here in front of me. We've hit it off. Let's get my product on Audible. So I bring it up. I go, hey, can I get my product on Audible? And he goes, yes, absolutely. I'm like, oh man, this is it. It all changes tonight. Entry fee is $500,000.
Oh, okay.
And we get 70%. You get 30.
Okay.
Now that's the old publishing model.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter was, at the time, they were getting 70% from Tom Clancy. They were getting 70% from Harry Potter. So they're not going to look at me and change anything. And so I kind of walked away. Darn it. And that was it. 4 years later, I hear, and that product came out, and that product did well. And it was funny because it was a product about a Microsoft product. It was a training program for a Microsoft product. And the product actually sold for an additional 3 years after Microsoft even sunsetted the product, which is absolutely hilarious. So the product was successful without Audible, but I didn't have the distribution that I wanted.
Sure.
Podcasting pops up in 2004. I did not see it as the nerd extension of the RSS schema allowing for enclosures, snore, snore, snore. I saw it as, this is how I become Audible.
Yeah.
No $500,000 entry point. My web server at the time was it.
Yeah.
I can do this. And I actually even started to build, podcasting, as everybody knows who's listening to the show, is free. And I invested about 15 grand in building a paid podcasting platform almost right out the chute. And it was very popular with all 4 of my customers. They loved it, but it wasn't where it was going. But I always saw it as distribution. I always saw it as content. I always saw it. And to me, it was the same thing. The web blew my mind because the web made it possible for someone to essentially have a store open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to the entire world.
Right.
Affiliate marketing blew my mind because it was a way to get a paid commission sales force 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all around the world. And podcasting was the natural extension of that. Now we can take our media 24 hours a day, 7 days a week around the world. So I always saw it from a business standpoint. Mm-hmm. I always saw it from a message distribution standpoint. And the industry began to pop up, and everybody got excited. They go, new media, new media, new media, new media, and then they just put commercials on it. Mm-hmm. And they don't even put commercials that are matched. They put generic commercials. They found these companies. GoDaddy was one. Funny enough, Audible was one. And there were these companies in the early days who put ads on shows, but the ads on shows were just add-on show prices, and they were really just radio. And the thing is, if you're really just going to be radio, be radio.
Yeah. Yeah.
What always excited me about podcasting was unique. You and I offline here, we're taking a look at your numbers. You have a show successful, you know, multiple, exponentially better than most of the other shows out there because the ads are targeted to the niche. You know, you've got a very specific audience.
Right.
You're doing very specific things with that very specific audience, and that's making you revenue. And that's been my vision for podcasting. That's my dream for podcasting. That's been my focus for podcasting since day one. And so, you know, your question about how to monetize is funny because you come in, Buck, from a real monetization standpoint, not a how can I do it like everybody else, but how can I do it smartly, intelligently, correctly? And that's what I've always done.
Yeah. So, you know, just in general with podcasting, you know, obviously we've come a long way since 2004. Tell me about the growth in this. I mean, is this the number of listeners is still, it's still relatively small as a proportion of the population, isn't it? And how is that growing? Do you have some statistics on that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's really funny because if you look at the statistics for podcasting's growth, just empirically, you know, downloads, that has stayed almost, what's the word I'm looking for? It's been very steady and very predictable since 2004.
Oh, really?
There haven't been huge peaks. There haven't been huge jumps.
Huh.
However, the news cycles for podcasting have had these huge jumps. There was a huge news cycle after Serial. That was one of the big ones that did it. There's been some news cycles after the public radio stations have jumped in. But a friend of mine actually has a collection of articles about the resurgence of podcasting dating from 2006 on. So the pure numbers, very predictable, going straight up, doing the same thing year after year. What's interesting is last year, Edison Research, who very respectable polling company, they do all the exit polling for the U.S. elections out of Boston, Massachusetts, great company. They've been following podcasting. Last year, they showed podcasting to reach 60 million Americans, which is the inflection point for, you know, basically it's a thing now, for lack of a better term. I can't remember the exact term they used.
So for reference,
mainstream, that was it.
For reference, do we have a number of what that was a few years before that, or?
Like, you can look it up. I don't have that in front of me, but it's the, they've got a public, it's called the Infinite Dial Report.
Yeah.
And maybe you could put a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah.
And, but pretty predictable. The rise was pretty steady, but the 60 million hitting mainstream was interesting. That took from 2004 to 2017. Okay. Yeah. But here's the interesting thing. Okay. So it took 13, 14 years for podcasting to get mainstream 60 million Americans. Now, here's what's really exciting. They're also following the smart speaker, the Amazon Alexa. I'd say her name, but she'd start talking to us. I forgot to turn her off. The Google Home, the Microsoft Cortana, you know, the smart speaker world.
Yeah.
You know how long those took to get mainstream?
Days.
Well, since they only track once a year, maybe it only took days, but since they only track once a year, it took a year.
Yeah.
Now, you know why? A multi-gazillion dollar marketing budget from Amazon, from Google. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and this is the next generation of devices to get these on, because imagine coming down to your office and saying, you know, hey, device, play the latest episode of X.
Yeah.
So that is growing really, really quickly. The connected home is growing really, really quickly. The connected TV is growing really, really quickly. The connected car is growing really, really quickly. And so these are the areas where we're going to start to see some really, really interesting growth that will be exponential. One of the big things was we used to have to sync. You know, we'd get up in the morning, we'd go, okay, I want to listen to these shows on the way to work. And so we'd have to put our device in the dock, we'd have to sync it up and take those with us. Once cell phone data became essentially free, part of the plan now, more Americans own smartphones than don't.
Yeah.
And they all have data. So now we get in our car, and podcasting has really changed from something you had to do proactively to now, hey, what do I want to listen to today on the way to work? What do I want to listen to today on my run? What do I want to listen to on the airplane? That kind of thing. And that's where the big inflection point has changed. And that's really more than some of these mainstream shows and stuff that have gotten the attention. But it's bigger than, I mean, it's huge right now.
Yeah,
it's mainstream and it's real.
It's interesting to me because I know everybody who's I know who's ever started listening to podcasts has become a podcast listener. And
Yes.
And so, it goes along with, overall, I feel like there's a trend in society right now towards decentralization. Of course,
Yes.
I'm kind of, I've become sort of a crypto guy, and so it's sort of everything thematic around me. I'm looking around, I'm like decentralization everywhere. And this is one of those things.
Yep.
And
Yep.
it just really gives you the opportunity to really really hone in on what interests you. I mean, you don't
Yeah.
have to listen to what somebody else is and like flip through stations and hope you got it. I mean,
Yep.
And people who listen to my show, I know some people are great fans and never miss it. And it's because I talk about stuff they want to talk about, right?
Yep.
And that's why I started this podcast in the first place, because no one wanted to talk to me about this.
Well, and the way, not only do you, Buck, see, the thing is, not only do you talk about what they want to talk about, but you talk about it in the way they want to talk about it.
Right.
The crypto space is seeing, there's a lot of podcasts right now about crypto. But
yeah,
a
no
lot
kidding.
of them are jokers.
They
A
are.
lot of them are nerds. A lot of them are like, oh, I invested $50 in, Ethereum. Now I'm an investor.
Right.
They're not looking at the long term. They're not looking at the implications. They're not looking at the stuff you're looking at.
Yeah.
So not only can someone now, nobody's going to get crypto talk on the drive. I'm out of Portland, Oregon. You're not going to get a crypto show on the drive into work.
Yeah.
But you can go to iTunes now. You can find several crypto shows. But if you're the serious investor who wants the inside scoop from people who've been there, done that, not just nerds associating themselves with, they can listen to what you're doing. So it's not just nichification, it's ultra nichification.
Yeah. I agree.
And as a result, you can build products and services and tools to serve that ultra niche, and that's where the revenue is. And the great thing is, it's not just you, that's the industry. So the last number we got from Apple was 10 billion downloads and streams in 2016.
Wow.
Okay? And, couple thousand of them were this guy, couple thousand of them were that guy, couple thousand of them were that guy. And this is where the nichification, this is where the focus, this is where the attention becomes really, really popular. And it's so much better. I mean, listening to a generic show about a generic topic, even if it's well produced, is 1/10 as exciting as listening to a very focused show about a very focused topic.
Yeah. One of the questions I have specifically is when we talk about podcasts, I've for the most part stuck to audio podcasts, although it's funny. As we speak right now, Paul, we started videotaping me do this sort of Rush Limbaugh style.
Okay.
And to put it on YouTube because we're trying to figure out, how do we get to more people? Because everybody who we get to, not everybody, but a lot of people we get to love the show, and we'd like to try to hit other places. So now we're just recording it. Now tell me, when you talk about podcasts, growth, are you talking about video podcasts, audio podcasts? What are you talking about specifically, or are you kind of, lumping it all in?
Well, it's lumping it all together because those are the numbers that you've got. And video podcasting at the moment is a very small niche. But let's talk about a couple of things. But first, let me give you the definition of podcasting that I go with, because this helps a lot of people. Because, it's funny. About 5 years ago, Joe Polish, our mutual friend and guy we write checks to, Joe would keep introducing me as if you want to learn how to podcast, talk to Paul. If you want to learn how to podcast, talk to Paul. And I was never interested in that. There's not a lot of money in how to podcast. The money is in how to make money from podcasting. But I finally wrote this book. And I went out to all the nerd bulletin boards and all the locations for all the podcasters. And I said, guys, let's finally get a definitive definition of what podcasting is. Because you get like 10 podcasters up against the wall, you get 10 different answers. And that really, really frustrates people. So, and the problem was none of them agreed. All of them hated me. I got called mean names. So I just came up with my own term. And so here's the definition, okay? And I think this will help anybody listening to this show. Audio or video made available online for easy on-demand consumption and or subscription-based delivery. So let's break that down into chunks. Audio or video, it's the same thing, same world. It's media files, okay? Online for either on-demand consumption or subscription-based delivery. Let's take those two areas. On-demand's huge. a lot of people go to YouTube for on-demand stuff. I've got a client right now, and we can chat about this offline. I've got a client who gets over 1,000 downloads of his podcast on YouTube.
Yeah.
Okay. and it's a neat little percentage. I'll tell you, it's a lot more than Stitcher. It's a lot more than some of these other platforms. Yeah. And so, yes, some people go to YouTube for on demand, but what's really interesting is with YouTube Red, people pay, you pay $9.99 a month and you get YouTube without commercials. Well, the YouTube speakers now, the Google Home, and I can't remember the big one, what that's called, but you can actually have it play things from YouTube.
Yeah.
So you could actually say, okay, Google, play, Buck episode, blah, 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 and it will.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense. And what's interesting is I love that you said, Rush Limbaugh style, because, the nerds will say, well, who's going to look at a talking head video? Yeah. Well, Rush proved to us a lot of people will pay.
Well, that's exactly right. And I kind of had the same thought too when we were, because my media guy, I hired this kid, Phil. He has a cinematography. I told you about him, but he's a UCSB kid, and he really wanted to do some video. He just keeps telling me to do video. I'm like, I'm just not, I'm just not a video guy. I don't really like to dress up, and I don't really, it feels rehearsed, whatever. So, finally I was like, I'm thinking Rush Limbaugh. I'm thinking, I remember even Howard Stern. Of course, he had a bunch of naked women on there too, which we don't have. But it's basically a studio, right?
Yeah.
People watch it because it just gives them something to do with their eyes while they're listening. Yeah. So that's why we decided to do it, right? I mean, it's like, hey, if this is what it takes for us to get our message out to you, we'll just record me doing it. Now, I have to make sure I'm not, when I first started this podcast, Paul, it used to be from my guest room back in Chicago, and sometimes I'd be in boxers.
Right.
And so I'd be talking to like the chief economist at Fannie Mae and be in my boxers. But I can't do that anymore.
Right.
If I'm doing the video. But yeah, I see what you're saying. So one of the reasons, I really wanted you on this show is obviously, you have a lot of interesting things to say in this podcasting world is fascinating. But as it relates to Wealth Formula and what we're doing here, I've had a number of listeners ask me, first of all, should they start a podcast, and if they should, how do they do it? So who should consider having a podcast? Of course, anybody could consider it, but give me some ideas. People listening out there, I got lots of doctors, dentists. I got people with a lot of incredible, specialized knowledge. I got people who are, famous producers and music producers and people who write music for famous people. Really interesting people, right? So what makes a podcast interesting? What makes it successful? Who should do it?
Well, 3 very different questions with 3 very different answers. So let's take them on. First of all, interesting. Let's take that term. What the world considers interesting versus what an audience might consider interesting is 2 entirely different things.
Yeah.
A lot of people see a podcast as, a Shark Tank type of moment. You have to convince 5 investors that the whole world wants to, knock on your door. If I grabbed the next 10 people I meet and I told them I was on your show and I explained what your show was, I don't think any of them would care.
Yeah.
I don't think any of them would find it interesting. However, everybody who's this far is like, okay, I see where Buck's going here. Maybe this is where it all comes together. So interest is in the mind of the beholder. And the thing is, in the monoculture, we used to have shows that appealed to everybody. We used to have Carson, Friends, Cheers, Cosby Show,
right?
These types of things, because the only way to make money was to get millions and millions of people to consume it. Now, people tell me, well, I want a lot of people listening to my show. Well, do you want a lot of people listening to your show, or do you want impact?
Yeah.
I want impact. Well, what if only one person listened to your show? Well, that's not impact. Well, what if that one person was the president of the United States. Now, when I used to say that, it had a different response than it's had recently. But what if that one person was the CEO of Microsoft?
Right.
What if that one person was Mark Zuckerberg? And so interesting is definitely in the eye of the beholder. Okay.
So
how do you go ahead?
No. So I guess the question is, in part, I'm just trying to identify, people out there thinking maybe I ought to start a podcast. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Who are those people, and give them some guidance on this.
Yeah. Anybody who finds themselves repeating the same message over and over again should really examine a podcast.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that, because, again, my media director here, Phil, keeps telling me, Buck, you kind of talk about the same stuff all the time, cash flow and assets and, money and stuff. Maybe you should talk about something else. I'm like, no, you don't get it. This is what I like to talk about.
Right.
And this is why I keep talking about it, because other people want to talk about it too. It would make no sense for me to go off and talk about a whole bunch of other stuff that I don't care about and they don't care about.
So there are a zillion podcasts about podcasting. That whole industry is very...
You have one of them, right?
Yeah. Now, and it's funny because there are probably 50 shows where you can find out what microphone to get.
Yeah.
There are probably 100 shows that talk about hosting. There are probably, I don't want to do that. I do a show called The Podcast Report at thepodcastreport.com. And I take on all of the topics that I get asked all year long. Like, for instance, Paul, what's coming? Okay. Now, we recorded this in January of 2018. Guess what my first episode of 2018 was?
What's coming in 2018?
Yeah, podcast predictions for 2018. Now, the cool thing is in this show, in this episode, first of all, I mentioned what I predicted last year, and I proved that I was right, which sets me up as an authority. And then I predicted what's going to happen this year, and I explained why. So now
I want to listen
when somebody says, hey, Paul, what's happening? I can say, hey, look at the first episode of 2018. And that changes that. So now it's fun. And predictions are fun because now that I'm putting it out there and accountable, and I encourage people to come back and get me if I was wrong, or I'm encouraging people to debate. But at the core, it's that same question that gets asked over and over and over again. Yeah. Another question I get asked over and over and over again is, hey, Paul, hot new podcast company X. What should I think about them? The elusive chasing of the, the chase. Well, I interviewed in the last episode, I interviewed a gal from a, new podcast hosting company X. And I just asked her, why in the world does somebody else need a new podcast company? And honestly, she really couldn't answer.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. She's got millions in VC. And so now, and the thing was, I didn't point out that she didn't answer. Really, this is the show where I'm pointing it out.
Right.
But a lot of people listened to that and said, okay, they learned, chase the other stuff. I did a podcast hosting company, a new one. I asked them, what's the difference between you and the guys who have been doing it for 10 years? Couldn't give me an answer. And so I've done this show reporting on podcasting, but every single one positions me as an expert. Every single one answers the questions that I've been answering for a long time. So now someone can do their homework by listening to my show. Yeah. Someone could do their homework by listening to your show. Nobody's going to listen to 5 minutes of Buck and, go to your course or invest in one of the funds that you've talked about or that type of thing. Nobody's going to do that until they've done a lot of homework and a lot of effort. And that's where podcasting becomes powerful. Now have fun with it. I mean, don't get up every morning. Today I'm going to report on the 4 podcast. Do it in a way that you do it with 4 buddies at a bar. But that's how the show gets made. And here's the thing. If only 20 people listen to the podcast report, as long as 1 or 2 of them is a potential client every month or so, I'm good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the money that comes to the podcast report is clients who pay me retainer on a monthly basis.
Sure.
Another example, my bookkeeper. I love my bookkeeper. He's just a common sense, reasonable guy. And I've wanted to recommend him to a lot of people here in town. But I have nothing to recommend. I just say, he's a common sense, reasonable guy. That doesn't translate. That's not really good on a bumper sticker. But I've told Neil, what you need to do is every Monday morning record 10 minutes of things I need to do this week in tax and thought and business development, and then just give me every week for 52 weeks 10 minutes of what I need to do.
Yeah.
And then let's make that a podcast.
Yeah, the way I see it, here's what happened with my story in podcasting. So if you go back and you look at shows 1 through 4 or whatever, they started, I think, back in 2000. Gosh, it must have been 2012 or 13. And the reason I did those podcasts back then was because I was a podcast listener. I was an avid listener. And what I would find is I'd have 3 or 4 podcasts that had shows that were interesting to me, but a lot of them, had, shows that were interesting to me once every 5 shows.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And so what I realized was there was nothing that was really talking just to me. Right.
Yep.
I came from I had a very specific demographic. I came from a specific demographic, a high earning professional and an entrepreneur too. And so I didn't really I didn't like the show. I liked real estate shows, but I didn't like hearing about, how to make a few bucks wholesaling and stuff like that. Wasn't very interesting to me. Exactly. I liked hearing about the economy. I didn't like hearing about escaping from a cubicle because I didn't work in a cubicle. You know what I mean? So I needed something that really resonated for me. So, and I also was one of those guys that I felt like, whenever I go to a party or something like that, I want to talk about certain things that a lot of people don't really want to talk about. Right? I mean, I like talking about money and the economy and investing, and I get super excited about it. And but then people don't really want to talk about it.
Yep.
And it might even be
Buck,
perceived
it's not like
as rude.
I go to parties and people want to talk about the future of podcasting.
Well, yeah.
So I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you.
So, in fact, talking about a lot of these things, frankly, in some circles, would be kind of rude, right? You don't want to talk about investing in money. And so I started it, but then after about 4 episodes, I started realizing a couple of things. First of all, I looked and saw who was listening to me, and it was like no one, right? No one was listening to me. Second of all, I was thinking, well, if I'm going to really do this every week, it's going to take a lot of time, and I got to be able to justify that. And in the time, I was like really driving a couple of my business to become sort of more independent without me. So then I just stopped. I stopped for like 2 years. And when things kind of settled down and I was like, I really want to go back 2 years, maybe even longer. It was like 4 years. I don't know. I started up another year and a half ago. And then I was like, okay, now I have time to do it. So I'm just going to do it. And I don't care what happens. So I started doing it, started talking to people. I started, just sending out my message, just thinking, well, gosh, worst case scenario, one day my kids will listen back to my thoughts on investing in money, and and they'll have a permanent record of me. The worst case scenario, right? And before you know it, I started getting interviewed on other podcasts, and the audience started growing. And before you know it, I got some fairly big names, and ultimately, culminating with the full circle for me last week was Robert Kiyosaki, where it all started for me. But I didn't think about monetizing this along the way.
Yes.
I didn't until I realized, hey, there may be an opportunity, and inherently I'm an entrepreneur. So I started Investor Club. Now, Investor Club, what is it? It's just part of what I do on a daily basis. I like investing, right? So, and I'm a credit investor. I look for stuff to invest in as a private investor. And so it was easy for me to slap that on. And okay, so now I help people invest and they make money with me the way I make money. I got really interested in some products that I participate in, and I was able to get into a position where, if people did this, not only did they benefit, but I would also get paid. So it was a very natural thing. And of course, I have commercials. I have commercials for products.
But you have commercials that are not, you have commercials for products that are targeted to your audience. And that does two things. Number one, your audience doesn't get upset when they hear commercials because they're targeted to them.
Yeah.
But number two, because you have the right audience, you are getting exponentially more for these commercials than any average standard podcast out there.
Yeah.
So don't just say you have commercials. You have commercials strategically and intelligently, my friend.
Yeah. By the way, those were the easiest things ever, right? Because they're guys that
you're
actually
targeted.
Well, and not only that, but they were a good example is my friend George Newberry, who I've been talking about American Homeowner Preservation, and he's been a sponsor. He was my first sponsor, right? This is the funny thing that happened was that I was talking about George a lot on the show, and it's fun because I'd been investing it for a few years. And so it wasn't coming from I wasn't plugging the guy because he was a sponsor. I was plugging the guy because it was making me money, right? And the next thing you know, I'm thinking I need to do some sponsorship. So I go to George. I'm like, George, how about you, how about you sponsor this show? And he says, let me think about it. And he comes back to me and says, look, hey, Buck, I just noticed, we've been paying, National Public Radio something like $10,000 a month.
Yep.
And you're outperforming National Public Radio right now for us. And I was like, wait a second, how much do you pay me again?
Yeah, exactly.
He doesn't pay me anything, right? It's something that George's Fund is something I've invested in for years. I believe in it, and made people a lot of money, and it made George a lot of money. It all worked out. So those are the kinds of sponsorships that I love because it's completely, it's completely organic, and it makes it really easy. Everybody wins. And finally, I'm spending so much time on this podcast now. Obviously, now I have to actually, make some money. But anyway, that was a lot about me, but I thought it would be good perspective on understanding this. So, in your experience, how hard is it for, people to create, what does it take to have a quote unquote successful podcast? And, is this a difficult technical thing for most people? I found it, relatively easy, but I'm, relatively tech savvy. Is this something that most people you feel like can do?
Well, again, it's back to that word successful.
Yeah.
If success for you is telling your life story so that your kids one day can find it, that's one thing. If success is I want to pay my hardware and software bills, that's another thing. If success is I want a significant chunk of the pie graph of the revenue for the year to be the podcast, that's something else. So The first thing you have to do is define what you want success to be. And what happens a lot of times, sadly, in podcasting is because, and we'll chat about the second part of your question in a second, because it's so easy to get into, a lot of people just start to see what happens. And that's not necessarily bad, but anything in life, you start with that, the old, failing to plan, planning to fail thing. If you know what you want from the podcast, then you can build the podcast around that. And that is the process that I really, really recommend. I have a thing called the 4 M's of podcasting. And the 4 M's of podcasting is simply this. M1, your market. Who are you talking to? Who's your audience? You have a very specific, very targeted audience. It's perfect. The message. What's the message of that audience? If you're talking to, moms who just had a baby, that's a very targeted audience, but there could be thousands of different messages. You could be, 5-minute humor in between feedings. You could be how to go organic with your kids. You could be how to get your body back. You could be, how to figure out how you're going to go back to work. There's all different messages that you can give to a market. So market, message. Then the next one is the money. Where's the money going to be? I had a guy call me, Buck, with millions of downloads of a show. Okay? Very popular show, hit all these top lists, and it was a show that taught you how to speak Spanish. Very cool. Now, here's the thing. He wasn't making any money. I said, how are you not making money? He said, well, I can't get any ads. I go, well, what kind of ads are you trying to get? He goes, well, I thought like Berlitz and Rosetta Stone would advertise. I'm like, well, why would Berlitz advertise for something to buy that you're giving away for free?
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, I wish somebody would have asked me that question about 2 years ago. And that's one of the problems that we deal with. So you figure out the money, then so market, message, money, then. And the thing is, it doesn't have to be, if you teach people how to speak Spanish, it doesn't have to be selling Berlitz. It could be, courses. It could be immersion weekends. It could be learn Spanish and we'll all go to Barcelona. There's all sorts of ways to do it. Then the last M is honestly the medium. And I appreciate, you didn't tell me about the YouTube thing, but I really applaud you for that. Sometimes the medium is podcasting, sometimes it isn't. If your audience is Luddites who are afraid of technology, podcasting is probably not a good media for them. You probably want to go to the printed word at that point.
Right.
And sometimes the media is just podcasting, sometimes the media other ways. I got a client who does this show, but he also has a CD on demand service. A lot of his clients want the CD every month of the show. So he sends them a CD. All automated, all done, but that's the way that works. Anyway, those are the 4 M's.
Right.
So I know a lot of people who have stumbled into things. A mutual, a guy we've chatted about in the past, we won't say his name, but a guy who's a big guru in the space. He did a show about a very popular television show. He did a fan show about a very popular television show. And then that television show got a lot of attention. And when people went to iTunes looking for that television show, they ran across his show. And he got gazillions of downloads and had a great show and got to go to fan conventions and that kind of stuff. But the monetization was zip.
Yeah.
Relatively speaking.
Yeah.
And so I really, really recommend going in with a plan. And what's fun when you go in with a plan, if you get up, every week we have the things that excite us. We have the things that make us money. Sometimes those are the same things, especially as an entrepreneur trying to do things intelligently. If you record an episode knowing that the plan for money is X, you're going to go in with a lot more excitement than if you record an episode wondering if anything will become of this one day.
Yeah. Yeah. This is, I think there's a few different ways to approach it. I don't think,
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, one of the things that I think is really useful, again, to think about is that if you want to start a podcast and you're thinking about doing something, on an ongoing basis, regularity is really important if you want to build an audience. And so if you work back from that, you have to have something that you feel like you want to talk about all the time.
Yep.
So to me, that's the number one thing. I remember talking to one of my investor club people about possibly starting a podcast. He was talking about wanting to start a podcast, and he was a primary care doc. And I told him, go for it, man. If you love medicine, you want to talk about medicine and a different topic, and there's like a million things you could talk about, and people love that, and you could definitely monetize that. You know what I mean? So it's good stuff, and I think there is an opportunity to make money. I'm happy to personally talk to anybody about my experience if anyone wants to get on phone with me and you're thinking about doing it. Hey, so, some of the movements you were talking about with the technology, wasn't there some movement towards podcast advertising type syndication and that sort of thing too? Or did that never really take off? I remember hearing about that.
Yeah. There's let's go really quick. I know I've done enough of these interviews that I know the question that I didn't answer. Let's do that really, really quick. How hard is it?
Yeah.
What do I need? Fact of the matter is, one of the top 10 management marketing podcasts for a long time with millions of downloads is a guy who talks about his workday on his drive into work using nothing more than his iPhone, and he clicks the record button.
Yeah. Although it's Russell Brunson, right? So
yeah, it's Russell Brunson.
So that makes it a little bit different.
Russell's amazing, but the fact of the matter is Russell doesn't need, it's not the microphone.
Right.
It's the talent.
Yeah.
Right. The right microphone, the right tech doesn't make you a good podcaster any more than the right knife makes you a good chef, or the right typewriter makes you Hemingway.
Right.
Okay. So you could record whatever you want to record. There's a show I loved where a guy would literally call this guy who's basically sort of a rock and roll philosopher king. And it's an amazing show. And basically the guy, he'd basically call the guy every week on the phone. It was sort of a phone version of Breakfast with Maury. And the whole show was a phone recording. That's fine. Other people have a fancy pants microphone, and that's fine. But the thing is, there are several under $100 microphones that plug into your computer through the USB port who get, easily 80% of the job done.
Yeah.
There's a company called Blue, Blue. Any of their microphones are great. You can find them on Amazon.
Yeah.
All right. So movements. You still want to chat that?
Yeah, well, just thinking, I knew if I asked you 2000 what's up for podcasting in 2018, you'd say listen to the episode, but a lot of people
No.
might
Let's talk. Yeah,
okay.
so see, podcast advertising, syndication, and networks and stuff. Here's the problem, Buck. Here's the dirty little secret that nobody's talking about. The traditional networks don't have enough episodes to really do the mass buys on any side of tech, because the problem is, if you have the buyer gets his percentage, the shows get their percentage, the tech gets their percentage, the number's so small that type of mass thing just has not worked well. And I don't know if it necessarily ever will. Let's say you were asked to join a network of podcast investment shows. Okay.
Yeah.
Targeted to your world. Well, here's the thing. An ad specifically targeted for your show is going to pay 10 times more than an ad specifically targeted to investors.
Sure.
Which is going to pay 10 times more than an ad specifically targeted to podcast listeners.
Right.
And so do you want, $1 to have somebody add something to your show, or do you want $100 for having, your UCSB graduate do it for you?
Right.
And so that is not necessarily doing that well. And the whole network concept has come into play because the network is something that we grab our minds around. I talked about the old shows, that we all used to listen to or used to watch on TV when they were all on NBC on Thursday nights. But the fact of the matter is, when we watched Cosby, we saw the ad for Cheers. And then we saw the ad for Seinfeld. Then we saw the ad for The Tonight Show. And we watch things linearly. Now we watch what we want to watch when we want to watch it. My wife and I, we love Jimmy Fallon. We really enjoy the monologue. We really enjoy the guests. But I have not watched The Tonight Show at 10:30 in like 5 years. Because I want to watch when and where I want to watch. So the thing is nobody's ever going to go, you can ask podcasters, like you said, they get really excited. You ask a podcaster what their favorite podcast is, they'll tell you in a heartbeat. But you asked a podcaster what their favorite podcast network is, they probably can't tell you.
Right.
Yeah. And
right.
so in this, in this world of just word getting around, that's why people come to me all the time. Can I advertise on net? Nope. You can advertise on a show, or, and you've seen this, you go on another show, best advertising possible.
Yeah.
Because it's that niche, it's that focus. A lot of people listen to this episode are going, wait a minute. He got Kiyosaki? I'm going to go listen to that episode. Bam, done.
Yeah.
And it's the right people. So the old models aren't necessarily there.
Yeah. Anything else exciting that we ought to know about? Big prediction, 218, so we can go back.
Well, two things happened actually in the last couple of days that were really interesting. And even after I recorded my predictions episode, which, by the way, is at thepodcastreport.com/134. Two things happened. Number one, some new stats came out. More people listen to on-demand audio than any other kind of audio.
Huh.
Okay?
Yeah.
That came out this morning. Number two, this is really exciting. So, the smart speaker world, Apple was supposed to deliver their smart speaker, holiday season 2017. They did not. It's coming. It's going to come probably February. Though, they might do something around the CES announcement. They always like to announce something to disrupt CES. But they announced this morning a dynamic podcast of basically your news sources that are going to come through the speaker when you get up in the morning. So you're going to say, okay, Apple, HomePod, play me my morning update. Now, Alexa already has that. Google will have that soon. But this idea of the dynamic stitching together of other content sources, that I think is the next step of podcasting. See, you're going to get X amount of listeners who are going to come from other shows and from friends and existing clients. But the rest of your listeners are going to come from people who are going to say, okay, Amazon. I like shows about investing. Give me good shows about investing. And just like with Pandora, where we give them thumbs up or thumbs down, we're going to start giving shows thumbs up or thumbs down.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is where the future of the stuff's going to come, is going to be, is not the network choosing you, but the platform choosing you. You know, one of the good things about you being on YouTube is there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be looking for topics related to what you're doing, who are going to see that other people who watch this video also watch this video.
Yeah.
You know, now, by the way, put that same video on Facebook, my friend, because 2 billion people a month check into Facebook. Some of them are your niche. And the great thing is Facebook does the hosting for free anyway, so it's not like you're paying
you can
for bandwidth.
put like a hour-long.
Yeah.
Really?
Why not?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I got that little consulting here. Got
There you go.
note from your bookkeeper this morning. So
Yeah, exactly. So, but that's really where we want to we really want to focus on us as the entity now.
yeah,
You know, and we saw that from social, and we saw that from everything else we've done, and it's just the logical next step.
right. So, Paul, do you do any podcast training anymore? I mean, like basic stuff, or do you do?
Well, I've got the book out.
Yeah.
And,
What's the book called?
Get this. Ready for this?
Yeah.
It's called How to Podcast.
That's a great title. It's very unique. Yeah, and by the way, let me demonstrate how we can potentially monetize that for you and for me. So we're gonna put an affiliate link in the resources section to Paul's book, How to Podcast. So what is an affiliate link? If you click on it, you don't pay anything. It just takes you to. Is it on Amazon, I presume?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, it takes you to Amazon, and if you pay like $3 or $4, how much is your book, Paul?
Actually, I stopped selling myself short. This one's $9.99
Okay.
Kindle, $14.99 paperback.
Right. So if you click on that, Paul will get paid, Amazon will get paid, and I'll get like 10 cents or something like that. But that is how you monetize the show. It's that simple. You just you're doing what you normally do and figure out opportunities that just are just natural for people, and this is just an example of that, right? So
Yeah, I've got a client who records her podcast live on Facebook, and during the Facebook recording, she talked about a product. She had an affiliate link.
yeah.
She shut down their e-commerce system.
What? Okay.
Now, she's doing really well. She's
Yeah.
very popular,
Yeah.
very well niched, very intelligently done. But yeah, she actually shut down. So she had to send a follow-up to everybody going, sorry, I broke the shopping cart.
Yeah.
And was that a nice little check that month?
Yeah. I bet.
She makes 4 figures. Ready for this? She makes 4 figures on the affiliate link for products she doesn't recommend.
What?
She'll do a taste test. She goes, I'll hate this, but if you want to try it, I got a link below.
Yeah. There you go. There you go.
And she'll get 4 figures just on that.
That's pretty good. Anyway, so Paul, how else can we learn about you? You can remind us the name of the podcast, the website, all the things that you offer, because I think there's probably some people out there thinking, you know what, I might give that podcasting a try, and I don't want to go into a dark cave without somebody who's been there before.
There we go. The 2 things I'd recommend is the podcast report at thepodcastreport.com. That's the show. That's the inside baseball stuff. That's not microphone reviews. That is, where's the business? Where's the money? What's coming in the future? The other thing I'd recommend is the book, How to Podcast. And when you buy the book, there is a registration opportunity where you can sign up for the book. And then as things change in the industry, I'll update you. By having your email address, then I'll make other opportunities available to you. I've got a course that basically walks you through. It's about 5 hours long, walks you through everything in the book. Not necessary. A lot of people have launched books. I've launched podcasts based just on the book, but if you're that visual kind of learner, that's there. And then that whole email series will give you how to get a hold of me and that kind of thing. If you want to do the social thing, paulcolligan.com/Facebook, paulcolligan.com/Twitter, paulcolligan.com/Instagram. Pick your favorites there.
That's great. Paul Colligan, everyone. Paul, thank you very much for being on Wealth Formula Podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Buck.
We will be right back. What do the Rothschilds, the Romneys, and the billionaire hedge fund managers know that you don't about growing and protecting wealth? As you might imagine, the wealthy have a few tricks up their sleeves. One strategy allows you to grow wealth tax-free at a compounding rate with no volatility. It protects your money from creditors and lawsuits, and it lets you invest the same money in two different places at the same time. How about that for amplifying wealth? To learn more, go to wealthformulabanking.com. Again, that's wealthformulabanking.com. Welcome back to the show, everyone. So, what do you think? I have to tell you, I can't tell you enough how this podcasting thing really has really just changed my life. I mean, and I'm not trying to be dramatic. It literally has. I mean, it is, the people I've met, the opportunities I've had. And what I mean by the people I met too is like, it's not only like, Kiyosaki and all these kinds of guys, but I talked to a lot of really interesting people on the phone, and it's great to finally get to meet a lot of people like mine. So it's really fun. Yeah, in fact, it was super cool. And Scott, if you are listening, I'll just share this story. There was a guy that I was talking to on the phone the other day, Scott Sanderson, and turns out that he and I played hockey against each other back when we were kids, like literally when we're like 12, like 10 to 15 years old. He was at a different school, but I recognized his name from a jersey because he was really good. But it's just so random. It's kind of fun, these things, these connections that we're getting. Anyway, seriously consider whether this is something for you, because it's been a great experience. And, it keeps getting better. It just really does keep getting better, this podcast for me. By the way, that I will say this. I'm going to use this time to plug, because how you can make this even better for me. You can go to iTunes and give me a 5-star review. Because if you do that, that's how the show's rankings go up and more people find it. And that's how we get our message out. And anyway, that's it for me today. It's been really fun. If you have any questions on how to get started in this process or anything else on podcasting, make sure to shoot me an email at buck@wealthformula.com. This is Buck Joffrey with Wealth Formula Podcast, signing off.
Thank you for listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast. Visit us on the web at wealthformula.com. The information contained in this podcast are opinions, not fact. As always, consult your own financial team before making any investment. See you next time.